Mentoring and growing stronger teams using Agile techniques. My name is Tite, and I'm being introduced, having come from a small software development company in Durban. I'm the co-founder, I'm the director, and sometimes I go and do some software architecture. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the thinking, and as far as we've got for 5 years worth of an experiment that we've been running, some of the guinea pigs of those experiments have been sitting in the crowd with us today, which I'm really glad to hear, so they can attest to some of the craziness that I've had to put them under. This is putting some thoughts out there. I'd like to be challenged. I'd like people to tell me that I'm talking crap or challenge me in a different way. The idea is to put these things in, challenge me, see where we're going. If something doesn't make sense, put up your hand, ask some questions. And yeah, let's just have some fun. All right. When I talk, I share beers. It's a tradition that I've had for a very, very, very long time. I've got some amazing beers. You will not find these in Johannesburg. They come from Durban. And there's a little story behind the brewery that makes these beers. The brewery is run by an ex-software developer who got sick and tired of writing software, decided to go and make some beers, lives up in Maritzburg, and he sells and makes different little beers. So much so that you won't find it looks professional printed label, but it's not. He handwrites his batch numbers and things on there. Super, super low key. That's really cool. All right, so I'll ask a question, answer it, and if you answer it, a little ball will come flying at you, trade the ball for a beer afterwards. Otherwise, I'm running up and down like a mad person trying to give you guys beers when you really should be listening to me talk about some new interesting stuff. All right, so we'll move on. What are the goals of this talk? So I want to just talk a little bit about the motivation behind Agile mentoring. There are 3 motivations. 1, we're all different. 2, life is a bitch, and sometimes shit happens. 2, 3, the industry's in a bit of a state. In fact, world employment is going to be in a state. And we've been thinking about how we could approach that and what techniques could we apply to re-engaging staff in our organization. Then I'm going to cover a bit of the mentoring process just so that you can understand, introduce these concepts of personas. Pretty much like the Scrum process, we have come up with some personas and defined them, who they are. Then have a look at some mentoring patterns, things that work really nicely. Then look at some anti-patterns, things that don't work so nicely. And then we'll move on to looking at what the results were of applying this into our organization. So the genesis for this way of thinking actually started with this man over here. Anybody got any idea who that is? So there was a hand right at the back first. You can tell I'm a software developer. I cannot throw a ball properly. All right, Malcolm Gladwell. He introduced this guy, Howard Moskowitz. And Howard Moskowitz had done some research in fact, is the pioneer of horizontal segmentation in the marketplace. Horizontal segmentation is the reason why, when you go into the porridge aisle, there's 15,000 different porridges to choose from. How it started with tomato sauce. Well, not tomato sauce, tomato pastes. And realized that there wasn't one tomato paste. There were many tomato pastes. Why? Because we are all individuals. We all have different tastes, and this brain is very, very different. And so that started me thinking, well, what does this look like? So in Code, we spend a lot of time trying to understand our people. We apply certain processes and put them under some tests to understand who they are and let them understand who they are. And so I'm going to introduce you to some of those people so that you can start to understand just how different we actually are. So meet Red. Red is an introvert, tough-minded, independent, high self-control. Red likes to connect on a task as opposed to connect via people. Red is an achiever. If Red gets his energy, or Red gets energy, sorry, I'm trying to not make this gender specific. Red gets energy by getting stuff done. At the end of the day, if Red hasn't got anything done, Red feels pretty worthless. And Red seeks autonomy. That's what makes him relevant inside the organization, in his eyes. Blue is slightly different. Blue is also introverted, also tough-minded, But blue is a little bit more accommodating and has a little bit less self-control. So blue might break the rules. Look at a process and say, I think we could do better. Ask the questions, why are we doing that? Blue is a learner, he's analytical, and the thing that he craves at his job is some creativity. Yellow. Yellow's an extrovert. Tough-minded, pretty much like red and blue. Accommodating, like blue. Low self-control, similar to blue. But yellow connects on an interaction. So when you interact with yellow, you need to ask yellow how mum and dad is doing, how the kids are doing, how's the dog, because that's what yellow needs. And yellow's an activator, is responsible, it's the person who gets into the company, drives some new initiatives, and because yellow's responsible, sees those elements through to the end. Yellow seeks to serve inside the organization. Very serving person. Green is an extrovert, similar to yellow, is receptive, accommodating, low self-control, very, very flamboyant kind of individual. Likes to test all the different boundaries. Connects by interaction, is an includer, likes to bring everybody in, likes to create harmonious environment, and seeks security. Those are 4 individuals with some very complicated internal wiring. If you look at the top items, those are all personality profiles, and they're relatively general. But as you move down the path, you will start to understand that people have different needs. They have different reasons to be at work. They get their energy from different things. You can have 2 completely similar personality people sitting at the table that will be activated in different ways. So, if that is the case, why the hell is HR making us look like we fit in a flippin' gray box? Because you mix all those cool colors together and you get gray, an insipid, no-life looking color. It's terrible. KPIs, KPOs, performance versus matrix. And I can rant about this all day, and you can see me, I'm getting a bit worked up about it. Why are we doing this? We are all individuals. We are not resources. We need to think differently about how we grow our people. So that's point number 1. And let me calm down a bit because I get ranty about that stuff and move into life gets in the way. Because it does. Life has this unfortunate quality in that it just happens. Car breaks down, kids get sick, all kinds of very complicated things. When I sit mentoring my mentees, I draw this diagram for them. This is work, this is the thing you do from 9 to 5. This is your career, the thing you should be taking care of. And the interesting thing about your career is when you become a gray box, this career moves into work, and it stops becoming a career, and it starts becoming a chore. We need to think about how we can extract work from career and make them overlap so that they can coexist nicely, but we can grow as individuals. On the other side of our work life is our private lives, made up of our personal lives, the things that are important to us, the things that give us energy, going for a run, having a beer with mates, playing some music, the things that are really, really important to us. And as we grow older, we get this thing called personal responsibility, the big monkey on the back. Kids, parents, school fees, all of the things that get complicated. And that gray box that we saw with KPO, KPI, performance versus something, doesn't cater for that. So what are we doing to make that work? Consider that we only have 2 really precious resources. We have time and we have energy. That's all. And if we run these guys at flat-out full pace, we get burnout. And I encourage you, in the session happening in Talk 100, go and listen to Tanya and Rian talk about burnout because it is an amazing and fascinating concept. And I would encourage everybody to go and listen to the talk last session this afternoon. So how do we do this? How do we create some balance that when our personal life shrinks and our responsibility goes bigger, because Now we're a mom or a dad. There are some complications in our lives. We need to get home a little bit earlier. We've got a new person inside our lives. How do we balance that so that we don't kill this and create a career that is actually something we're proud of? Point number 2. And how do we grow in this industry? Collider Code started 7 years ago on Monday. We started with 5 people. And we couldn't pick and choose who we got. We got the best people we could afford and the best people that were available at that time. That's not to say we didn't get the right people, but we started to think differently about who we hired. We started to think about how employee number 1 is going to grow to become a leader in the organization. We started to think about, why is one of my best programmers a person who doesn't have a degree? Why is one of my other best programmers a chemist? Why is my top tester an environmental scientist, sorry, she may hit me for that. Why is my second tester an electrician? And my Scrum Master, one of the best Scrum Masters I've worked with, is an adult educator. Why aren't we thinking differently about the people that we deploy into our organizations? And once we've deployed them, how are we going to grow them to service this industry? We've got AI taking over. We're not thinking about where we're going. And hopefully, this will give us a bit of a way to move forward. Rant over. All right, so some things to think about. Why on earth did we embark on this idea of doing things in an agile fashion? So we've had these 3 elements put in front of us. And the first thing we started to say was, when we run projects, and we do these relatively successfully, we time box the development. Why don't we time box career planning? Why don't we time box career development? And that's the first principle I want to be able to put down, is time boxing career development. So the process looks something like this. We'll get to these guys a little later, but we have a role framework, we have a role definition that tells us what are we shooting for. And we sit down together at this point over here and plan for about a week. There's no hard and fast rule here. We plan for a few days, what is it that we're going to do in the next 90 days? We look at, are we going on holiday? Where are we going? How are we going to do it? What are the stresses? Have I got a project deadline looming? We look at all of those types of things and agree on some principles and some items that we are going to get done in the next 90 days. Then we start executing, and we connect once or twice, once every week or every fortnight. Just connect. Where are you going? How are you going? How are you finding it? What do you think the 3 questions are that we ask when we meet? Sorry?
What's going well, what's not going well, what did you do?
There you go. What did I do this week? What did I do last week? What am I going to do? What are the impediments that are getting in the way? Can I give you a ball? Incidentally, if you don't like beer, there's chocolates up there as well. All right. Simple questions. It makes mentoring very, very easy. It starts shifting the responsibility from me as a mentor to you as a mentee. All right, so we've asked those questions, continue to move. At the end of the cycle, we do a reflection or a retrospective, and we unpack. Was this easy? Was this hard? Did I bite off too much? Is some craziness just unfolded in my life? And look to readjust the next plan for the next 90 days. Out of this process comes an assessment of how far we did, why we did or didn't go so far, and we have 3 points of reference so that when we go to a review, it's not based on the work you did in the last week or in the last month. It's based on a performance over an entire year. So that's the premise of what we're actually doing. And look at it and you go, that's actually quite simple. And standing in front of you today, I'm like wondering if people are just going to pelt bad fruit at me because it feels that simple. That really is. So, how do you manage this process? Well, how do you manage any agile process? You put it on a board. And people say, well, I don't have access to a board. You do. Trello. How many people get a mail from Taco from Trello? Hey, I see you've got some DIY to do. Things that your wife put up for you, some cool things for the weekend to keep you busy. Trello boards are cheap. Trello boards are easy to get into this process, so we encourage to move into Trello boards. And this is how we do it. We create things called goals, big, hairy, audacious things that we need to do to be able to take our career from A to B. And it might be that we learn to build a REST-based API. Right, that's quite big. It's quite complex. For some people, senior type people, do that in a few hours. For young people, it looks like a big hairy monster. So break it down. Create a deliverable. So build a single entity REST-based API endpoint just to start working on it. And maybe before you start building that API, maybe you need to do some reading. Read chapters 1, 2, and 3 of Irresistible APIs. Then go and create a small Swagger document for the single entity, and then code up the single entity so we can use it as a Swagger document to test what we're actually doing. We've broken it up into small parts. And here's the secret. Those parts have to be small enough to be able to get through quite quickly. They also have to be binary. There is no subjective, did you do it or not do it? Did you read chapters 1 to 3, and can you convince me that you've read chapters 1 to 3? It's easy. And you want to try and keep it as easy as possible so that you keep momentum going and you keep people focused on working on their career. So that's what we do. So that you could liken the goal to an epic, a deliverable to a story, and a task to an action. Making sure they're small and making sure that they are binary. But that's not all we need to do, because this is just technical stuff. You need to think about making the growth in your company holistic. So technical skills are great, but you need to balance that with some soft skills or some behavior skills. So put some items in there, and would be really cool to give your company some personality and start adding some personal life goals into this person's tracking of their developments inside the organization. This we don't make mandatory. It's if you want to do it or not, but I find that everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants to be able to be part of a bigger picture. The really cool thing about this is that if Simon is doing his black belt, blue belt, I as a mentor get to tell the organization that Simon might come in on Monday morning looking black and blue. But it's cool, guys, because he's just been assessed. And people build a relationship. It gives people an identity and allows us to grow together. These we call themes, and we map them out on a board that looks something like this. There's some technical skilled themes and some personal life skilled themes. And the one that you might be able to understand quite a lot, because this is one that we get to work on a lot with a lot of our staff, is I want to buy a house. Well, first thing you need to do when you buy a house is make sure you have a decent credit rating. Because if you don't have a good credit rating, you're going to get a terrible interest rate. So let's help you sort that out. Some education happening at the same time. And then the first thing you need to do about that is to pay off all those terrible bills that you have floating around. So you can see how small and easy it is, these small bite-sized chunks that you can make for people to work forward. All right, Agile mentoring personas. Hands up. How many of you guys have mentored somebody? A fair number. What's your biggest complaint? Just shout out. Biggest complaint in mentoring people? Accountability. 1. Good. Sorry? Decision making. What to do and what not to do. How to guide that person's career. Good point. At the back. Motivating them. Finding time. Finding time, because it's draining. Because here's what most mentees expect. You're going to show me how to do this thing. And that's not mentoring. Mentoring is guiding, showing people where to go, how to go, not sitting with them and coaching them and walking through them. And we discovered this quite quickly, is that it's actually exhausting if the mentor is going to own the entire process. So we created these concepts called personas. All right, so we have a mentee, and somebody said, trying to make them accountable. They need to take responsibility. This is a conversation early in a mentee's engagement. This is your career. This is where you need to take responsibility throughout where you're going. They also need to listen, and they need to keep an open mind. That's a theme all the way through. Hand at the back. Yes, slides will be uploaded tonight. Cool. Let's watch my Twitter handle for the slides. All right. Mentor. Shapes the career, removes the impediments, listens and keeps an open mind, firm and fair. In our company, mentors represent the employee to the organization, and they represent the organization to the employee. So they keep a tight and fair, firm hand on career development. It needs to be a good connector and generally well-read. When you read that, you're probably thinking to yourself, not everybody can be a mentor. And you're right, not everybody can be a mentor. It is a difficult job, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and often takes a fair amount of experience. All right, so what we do find is that everybody wants to be able to contribute back into somebody's development. And so we create these roles, personas called coaches. Coaches are people that live with an individual for a fairly long period of time, coaching them through something that's quite technical. And I'm not talking dev technical, it could be BA technical, it could be testing technical. So when I say technical, read into that. They always have to be technically strong at the thing that they need to do. Coaches also don't need to be senior people in the organization. Coaches can actually be junior people in the organization. And we find often, if we have very good junior developers that are coaching not so strong junior developers, we actually have a very good interaction. All right, they need to listen, they need to be firm and fair. And then we created this concept called a guide. And a guide spends a very short period of time with you. Let's say, for example, the testing department needs to be able to use Git. I'll find a guide. There's a guide that will show you how to do Git, 3 Friday afternoons, and you should be able to use Git. So that is basically the concept. And the idea that you're getting here is that we're trying to share the load in how we develop our people in our organization. All right, mentoring patterns. All right. The first mentoring pattern, and you'll see that as I played out those personas, that everybody needs to listen. We've always got to be listening, because one of the fundamental parts of an agile process is looking for feedback. The only way that you can find feedback is by listening and observing and just seeing where things are going. So one of the ways in which you do that is to get some face time. This process is face time intensive. You spend every week get together, every fortnight get together, spend time with your mentee, listening and understanding and empathizing. Reflect on the process. Look at what you're doing. Seeing where can we optimize? How can we change it? The process that I've put out for you today and the process that we're running at Code is probably not the process that you guys need. Start with something, start with the idea. You can start with this as an idea, and then you move forward. But always refining, always refactoring to make sure that the process is getting better. Looking for feedback we've talked about, and we've just adopted this pattern, which is the ad hoc reflection pattern. This is where mentors or directors or anybody gets a group together, listens to how the process is going, takes the feedback from that group and feeds it back into the organization so that we can refine the organization's approach to growing people. Right. The next pattern, I'm not going to come back to always listen and have feedback. That I think is self-explanatory, but these patterns here as we move down are not self-explanatory, so I'm going to whiz through them and then we're going to start talking about them in a little bit more detail in the slides that are going to follow. Create a growth framework. So really what you want to try and do is create a framework that people can look at and get a good holistic view or overall view as to what is the expectation of me as a software developer in this industry. We'll take a look at what that looks like. Give them some ideas on where they should be looking, what's necessary to be looking at, and where they could go to, and probably things that may not be of interest, but it could be helpful. The reason why we do this is so that we can create avenues of growth. The one thing that I've learned about mentoring young people is that Some of them mentor slower. Some of them mentor faster. Some of them have an incredible sponge-like mind. Some of them take a little bit longer. You want to be able to give people a playing field that they can look at and explore. So once they've done their core stuff, they know where they can go and start exploring. There's nothing worse than making somebody do something just for the sake of doing something. Prepare and practice an endgame. So the idea behind preparing and practicing an endgame is that we start teaching or start introducing concepts that are important to software development. Hands up, how many developers are absolutely frustrated with how people handle exceptions inside their code base? Huh? Are you frustrated with how people handle security? How do you handle error logging? It's the biggest frustration, and we don't do anything about it. We haven't spent time explaining to our young developers how to handle errors correctly. So make that a practicing an endgame kind of concept. Let them practice on something. How do you log an error? Most developers that are coming into industry from uni are pushed into a big framework. They have no idea how the thing actually hangs together, no idea on the moving parts, and are completely lost. Guide them through that. We'll look at that in a slide or two. Baseline your mentees and do it often. So this pattern came from listening to our staff. Over the last 6 months, we've had a lot of complaints about how are we trying to move this, where are we going? Young people coming into my office and saying, this isn't working for me. And to their credit, we created a new pattern which allows us to baseline. So look at the career path, take everyday jobs and say, those are the things that you're doing. All right, you're baselined. You don't need to know those things. You're doing them in your job. Let's go and find other areas for you to be able to move in. This is a particularly powerful pattern, and it's a pattern we uncovered from doing this. Apply influence carefully, so we'll talk about that. At the bottom, you can be quite draconian. As you get to the top, you've got to give some leeway. Talk about this. Again, a pattern which we've only just started to uncover over the last 6 months. Take a holistic approach. We'll get onto that, just making it a little bit more engaging. And then the last one, which I'm not going to talk about too much, but it's an important aspect because I feel people forget it, is mentor your mentees, coach your coaches, and guide your guides. You have to invest in the people that are growing the people in your organization. You can't just leave it to run amok or leave it to run by itself. Most organizations I talk to go, yeah, we've got some mentors. Who are they? I don't know. They're there, and the mentees know who they are. It's like, well, that's cool, but do you have a common vision? Do you have a common direction? Do you know what problems they're facing? It's important to be able to touch base with those individuals. All right, so create a growth framework. So this is, at a very high level, the concept of a growth framework. So we've got application development. As an application developer, and incidentally, this is for full-stack applications, for enterprise development teams. All right, so this is not a mobile development. This is not for gaming. Those will have a completely different set of things we'd be worried about. But in general, I'd like you to know about some databases. In particular, when you start this, because this is for an apprentice, I'd want you to know something about relational databases. And I'd like you to know about UI, and I'd like you to know about APIs, and then some application design techniques, and some development tools. So you're starting to plan out and give some guidelines. Things in blue are things I'd like you to read about. And you look at that and you go, API technology, SOAP is dead. No, it isn't. How many people work with the banks? They love SOAP. I don't know what they're trying to clean themselves with, but they love SOAP. And that's the thing, is that people still need to carry a knowledge of it. So here's some stuff you need to read about, or just have a passing understanding about. Here's some stuff that I really need you to understand, because in our organization, we write REST-based APIs. And they may be dead, they may not be, I don't know yet. But right now, they're an important aspect. This new technology, GraphQL, however, is something that you need to be aware of. As a junior apprentice person, I don't necessarily want you to know about it, so it's marked in red, but you at least can hear the story, so that you go, hey, I saw this, connected with this, I've now started to be able to pique an interest in something. Purple are the things that are coming up next. So maybe you want to get there. So for these young developers, they need to understand APIs, be able to maintain it, and do some testing. And after that, probably get to some security and deployment, because those are important aspects. But you've created the framework. And if we blow it up, it looks something like that. All right. And as we move to become a more accomplished developer in the organization, a lot of these things start turning green. Some new bubbles start popping up underneath this DDD space, and we're now starting to build out this framework that people actually know where on earth they need to go. So that's the first thing, create this framework. This framework creates the avenues. It's not detailed, it just gives some guidelines on where we need to go. Mentors should start filling out those details. Preparing for the end game. I can't explain the number of young people that come out of university that do not know how to do this. Put together a simple n-tier application architecture that is just a table into an ORM, into some piece of code, exposed an API, and does a simple application that only adds, edits, deletes, and lists elements. It's shocking. It really is. It's a sad indictment on the education inside this country at the moment. There's nothing much that we can do about it, though. We can't go, whoa, it's a problem. We actually have to solve it. And this is the start of preparing for the end game. So we get developers, young guys, start with a single table. All I want you to understand is the vertical. I don't need you to understand all the ins and outs of Angular or whatever it is you choose to put at the top. It's not too important. I need you to understand the vertical, because I'm preparing you to understand bigger architectures in the future. We get them to expand this program to add security, add roles. Take this application to the point where you can create a complex system and do it slowly over time, preparing them with concepts like how do you handle errors, how do you log errors, how do you do performance monitoring. Add these elements incrementally as you go. And this is preparing them to become the best architects that they can 10 or 15 years from the point of reaching you. This is also an interesting project, because what we do with our guys is we start preparing them to leave us. I know that sounds weird. It really does. But most of our apprentices don't stay with us for too long. And what we start doing is giving this into GitHub and start working on your CV. For senior people, this becomes the element that allows you to start playing with new tech. So I had this problem. One of my senior developers came to me one day and he said, I'd really like to work on a mobile team. It's like, dude, we only have one mobile team, and it's full. So how do we solve that problem? If he'd been on the program long enough, he would have had a REST-based API, pulled out Xamarin, or whatever framework you feel like you want to develop in, and start building your application from there. Start practicing those end games. Cone of influence. All right. As you move up the organization, you become less and less restrictive and controlling about what people learn, and we've learned this in the hard way. Really tough conversations with people at this level here, where they're being told, this is exactly what you need to learn, this is exactly how you need to learn it. To the point where we started doing this. This is the general development cycle inside the organization, and people that get to the top, the accomplished developers, accomplished senior developers, generally 8 to 10 years worth of development, they need to start learning how to POC. Because one of the biggest things that I've found when I go into organizations is that the top people do not know how to put a proof of concept together and bring it back into the organization. You know what they do? They write the proof of concept in the production code. You're laughing like it doesn't happen. Of course it happens. Of course it happens. Start teaching them how to POC. Get guidance from external parties in the industry. Start looking at the ThoughtWorks tech radar. Start making them accountable, or at least give them their responsibility to start bringing some of that stuff into your organization. And if you can, let them help you with the company direction. We only have 40 people. My senior staff helping with the direction takes the load off me. Get to go surfing a little bit more. Holistic growth. So we looked at this earlier. Technical skills balanced with soft skills, balanced with our personal life. I once presented this concept, the themed concept, at an unconference. And somebody turned to me and said, "You've forgotten an important ingredient." I was like, "I don't think I have." And they said, "You have." How are you contributing back into your team, the people who you work with every single day? And so we created this concept of contributing back into team. And that naturally led to contributing back into the company, which then naturally led to contributing back into the community. And that's taking the concepts that you've learned and bringing them back. This gives people with the need to have some autonomy to find a problem on your team and fix it by yourself because you have the autonomy to do stuff. It gives people the ability with service to push that service need back into the organization. Creativity. Any anchor, career anchor that you can think of, you can start manipulating and not manipulating, you can start working with when you start giving people the ability to contribute back into team, back into company, back into community. And we normally start from junior into team, into senior, into company, and then the more executive elements into the community. It also gives us a balanced company because we're not only looking in, we're also looking out. Right, some anti-patterns. Context switch burnout. So Kaleidocode has a policy that every Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock, all project work stops. Anybody who's out with a client needs to be back in the office, and we've got some learning time. Everybody starts learning. It translates to 17 days of learning time a year, which translates roughly to the same amount of leave we give to an employee. All right, so we give people these opportunities to learn. And this is where we uncovered context switching burnout. Because everybody was leaving their project to the end of the week. Well, quite rightly so, because you've carved out some time to start learning. But the context switch from work and projects back into the thing that you did last week is very, very taxing. It's very, very difficult. It is slow. It takes an hour to get back in. What was I doing? Where's that code? Pull that thing. Yep, okay, I'm back on track. I'm starting to code. Now some person who's also playing with some similar tech, hey, did you see this? Oh, drop the connection, right back into it, okay. The amount of work that you get done in that short period of time is very, very little. It's very demoralizing, and it's very difficult to stay motivated. And so we see this. I had a young developer working with me, gave him a project to do, and he was like this. I mean, Dan was like over the moon. I'm going to work on this thing, I'm going to do this thing, I got some security, and every time I saw him on the corridor, he's like telling me more about what he was doing. And eventually it looked like to the point where he handed over the work, and he said to me, I hate this piece of work. Well, what's the point of that? I want you to enjoy what you were doing. I didn't want you to lie on the floor and be absolutely exhausted by the time you get to the end of your project. So beware of context switch burnout when you're trying to give people pieces of work. Make that work small. So don't be over-optimistic. I gave a project to a senior developer the other day. We started doing some DDD unpacking and hey, how are we going to model this thing? Where are we going to go? And eventually it turned out he was trying to solve a problem in the music industry. I'm like, dude, it's like you've got 4 hours a week. I don't know if we can do this. It's just overly optimistic. It's going to lead to context switch burnout. You need to be careful at the amount of work that they take on. And then not listening to the room. When a mentor stops listening, when directors stop listening, when people who are trying to make this process work stop listening, this whole thing starts to fall apart. To the point where we now have a process that looks something like this. So you're aware of our 90-day cycle. That output from here feeds back into HR. HR will feed into the directors or into the mentors to get some to come up with some new concept. Our HR department run on an agile process. They hate it very much, but when a software developer decides he's going to take over HR, it turns upside down. And we taking that information, feeding it back into the roles, feeding it back into the process. There's information that travels backwards and forwards here because they do random checks, we do random checks as directors, and the mentors do random checks, feeding the information back in so that we can re-guide that role framework. Is the thing we're doing relevant? Is the technology moving? Should we not start thinking about changing that career framework a little bit? You need to get that feedback early, you need to get that back often. So that framework is an ever-evolving, moving target. All right, you're looking at me and going, this looks cool, but I don't know if it actually worked. And so we have another process that we do every June, May, June. We do a climate survey. So we work very, very closely with an industrial psychologist, and every year she goes and does an anonymous feedback session, and then I wait with bated breath while I wait for the results of that. All right. The results came out in 2017, and just after we did the results in 2017, we rolled out the mentorship process to everyone. So for 5 years, there's been 1 or 2 people, 3, 4 people that have just walked with me on this process, and we've grown it and grown it and grown it. In 2017, we said, all right, enough iterations. We're rolling this thing out, and we look to see what happened in 2018. And this is what happened. 2017 result. People getting feedback on their performance, meh. Now, much higher. Recognition and reward, career development, training and development, communication, job satisfaction, knowing what the strategy is, resources and systems. Everything that was low in 2017 was up. Not only because we ran out the mentoring process, but predominantly because we ran out the mentoring process. What struck me was recognition and reward. We didn't do anything. We just acknowledged that you were moving forward, that you had gone from one step to the next step, and you were this far along the path. Training and development. We don't have a big budget. We're a flippin' small company on the arse end of Africa, making something. We've got 40 people. We don't have a massive training budget, but people think we do. They do. We've got plural sites. Woohoo! You get that at home. And we've got some books and a couple of other little things, YouTube. That's what we've got. But people think it's bigger and better than it is. Job satisfaction is up. Strategy, resources, systems, everything is moving up. Now, I'm crapping myself for 2019 because we've made some mistakes this year, so I'm expecting those things to drop. But that was an amazing, amazing turnaround just by applying this mentoring structure. All right, so that's my story. I want to thank you for listening to my talk. And if you want to come and give me some hard times, let's do that. All right, I've got 5 minutes for some questions. I'll take a question here. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. So we're going through a very, very strong process at the moment where we are mentoring our leaders in our organization, starting with the top. So I have a mentor who gives me crap. It's really hard. But yes, we do need to do that. So yes, external input is very important. The reason why we started that, because we couldn't find anything, because it didn't feel right. And every time I go to an unconference, and every time I talk at a conference like that, I get more feedback. And every time I listen to the people that are working with me, I get more feedback. So I'm not aware of anything. But the only way to get it is that. Do you want a beer or do you want chocolates? There you go. Oops, sorry. They were the colors they are for a reason. There was red, blue, yellow, green. Guys, could you please return those balls? My dogs will be very upset if you. Like, 2 years ago, I had squeaky ones, and they were gone. I haven't seen them, and the beers were gone too. Any more questions? Question at the back there. the big trick here is that I'm at the top, and I get to call the shots. And you're going to need to get buy-in from people inside the organization. This is not easy. This is not a trivial thing. That learning time I talked about? I'm going to throw you these chocolates if you don't mind. There we go. That learning time that we talked about, that took time to get into place. We started with 1 hour every Wednesday morning. We took it to an hour and a half. We took it 2 hours. Then people were saying, it doesn't work on Wednesday. We're going to move it to Friday. And we looked at it and went, Bureau Clock starts at 3:30. Why don't we just make the whole Friday afternoon thing? So you got to start with some incremental changes. You got to start to be able to show people that there's some value. I'm not entirely sure how you would do it in a massively complex organization. Maybe you start in your department. Maybe you just figure out where your sphere of influence is and start in that space and then grow it bigger and then grow it bigger. It may be a pithy answer, but that's as best as I've got for you. Any more questions? Yep. Sure.
Biggest advice for a mentee in terms of getting the most out of that mentor-mentee relationship in terms of growth?
Make it clear what some of the expectations are. Be very, very specific and firm about keeping to those things. Make them responsible. In a mentee-mentor relationship, it's quite hard. In our organization, the responsibility comes through. Those things go to your review if you're not moving fast enough. And we don't hold people to that, please understand, but there is an element of holding people to that. So there are ways to be able to incentivize, although I hate the way we look at that. But for me, it's like sitting down, connecting, listening, and some of my mentee interactions have lasted as long as 4 hours, just listening because stuff is happening, and just connecting, building up a rapport, and giving a bit of a framework to where they go. Any more questions?
I've heard it argued that performance reviews and growth should be separated. But I've never seen that work well, anyone being able to really separate performance reviewing and this kind of growth process that you described. Do you try and separate that at all? Or what's your opinion?
Take that. So I'm trying to think, you're right, performance reviews is like, what are you doing, where you're going, but I'm able to understand the context because sometimes with performance reviews is this whole KPO type of conversation. For me, that's a really terrible conversation because it's the organization telling you how you need to perform and move. And so
just the need to be able to decide whether you're getting a raise or not, whether you're moving up in the company. That need around what's happening to your career inside of the company. Like, what size bonus are you getting? Do you try and separate that away from this mentor-mentee kind of growth process? Or is it one and the same thing?
We don't incentivize our staff the way that most people incentivize their staff or recognize their staff. I have a young developer who started with the organization and grew very quickly and got paid according to that growth. The value that you add to the organization can translate relatively quickly, and that number can work out quite well. So the idea of younger people adding value very quickly and working up that ladder is certainly very clear in our minds. And it's very different to a corporate environment. So we may have different problems that we're trying to solve. I mean, normally a corporate goes, we've got 10% for the year, and then you've got to split it between all these people. Geez, what a shit thing to do. Like as a leader, wow, what are you going to do? Everybody's performed this year. And Jack's got a new baby. Oh, shit, okay, that's great. It's like, it just sucks. So in a small organization, it's relatively easy to be able to do that. Those conversations become quite personal. The mentor's putting the ideas down. There's a single mom, blah, 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 da, da. Those things count in terms of performance reviews. But we can do that because we're a small company and we can make it personal. And we've got a bit of a holistic view of where it's actually going to go. I don't know if I've answered. That's the last question I can take right now. Guys, thank you very much for joining me. And see you soon.